All right. Good morning. We're live from San Francisco and Glen Park, Bird and Beckett Books. My name is Denise Sullivan, and this is the San Francisco Lives Live Talk Series, our Foggy July edition. My guest this morning is Ingrid Valdez, BCBA. That is, she's certified in the applied behavior analysis, which she's going to tell us a bit about. But this morning, our discussion is going to center on grief and loss and surviving different types of ways of being when we're under those particular types of stresses. Good morning, Ingrid.
Good morning, Denise, and thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you, and thank you for using your Sunday and your free time to come and speak about this heavy subject. Before we started to roll, you and I were talking about the weather, as people do when they are just getting to know each other, and it's a particularly foggy Sunday in July, right?
It is very foggy today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And because you specialize in environments, immediate, I suppose the physical environment, but also the emotional terrain, right? And how
Exactly.
those things work together. Tell us a little bit about how someone might be feeling on a foggy July Sunday morning when, my perception is the rest of the world's having fun. What
Right.
does your science tell us about that?
Well, on a foggy July, especially like a day like today, I'm thinking that people are just in their homes with sleeping still, blankets over their heads, a cup of coffee or tea, and binging or watching movies. That's something that I will certainly do, especially on a foggy day, only because my brain is already thinking about relaxation. And it's not prepared to be active. There's no sunlight coming in, so my brain is really dormant at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
So I'm thinking most people will be indoors hanging out.
yeah. So then add something like a recent or a seasonal or an anniversary of a trauma or a loss or something difficult. On top of that, change in the weather,
Right.
and what might we be looking at?
Changes in the weather definitely affect the way we behave, right? We typically are shaped by the variables in the environment. So let's say that the weather is foggy and you have a memory of a loved one that's coming to mind. Your mind is going to think about typically being sad, right? Sad and disconnected. So sometimes that's a trigger for some people when they are in that state, when they're thinking about their loved ones. And then the weather, it also adds up a little bit more of that sadness to it. So sometimes people can get lost and people can get confused and just linger around more
Mm-hmm.
thinking about that. But in 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 the environment itself, you find practical ways to cope with the loneliness that you're feeling at that moment.
Right. So, I'm guessing, without being, an expert like you are, and we're going to get into the different ways that people cope, or not cope, but navigate their different states of being, right? That we all have different ways of doing that. But, and before we get to that and some of the resources available for people who are in deep states of mourning, or recovering from traumatic experience. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the science of applied behavior analysis, so I can have a better
Of
understanding, and
course.
listeners too. It's not as familiar as different modes of therapy or science or study,
You're
correct?
right. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I usually like to start by talking a little bit about the science and talking what that means. BCBA stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst, and behavior analysts like myself focus on the science of applied behavior analysis. Applied behavior analysis means that the application of specific interventions are are specific and they are applied. They're not theoretical, right? And the behavior part is basically what people do and how people react to that science. And the analysis part is basically studying how people behave. And that's what we do as behavior analysts. We study the environment and we try to find out supportive ways that people can cope with the challenges that are going on in their environment. In this particular case, we're talking about grief and we're talking about loss. So, in a behavioral lens, you can think of as ABA identifying those behaviors. For example, withdrawal. Those are observable events that we go by. We actually try to focus on what we can see in applied behavior analysis. However, my experience with grief is not just an emotional experience because we know that grief is very emotional. Is what people think and feel on the inside. On a behavioral lens, I try to focus on those particular things, identifying those behaviors, withdrawing from your friends, right? And then analyzing and finding ways to help people cope with whatever they have in their immediate environment, because not everybody copes or grieves the same way.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little earlier about, primarily these days, and we will get to it again, that you work with the older adult population who, are not strangers to successive losses, griefs and losses, loss of a spouse, or one by one their friends slip away. We'll get to how you help with that, but that was not your initial entry into this field. Tell us a little bit how you got from there to here.
Yeah, that's a very interesting transition. Um, as a BCBA, living and working in the Bay Area, my connection to grief is both personal and professional. You know, the pandemic brought a lot of losses. We lost routines, we lost loved ones, and we lost identities. I was working in an agency supporting children with autism spectrum disorders. My main role was to provide a safe and supportive environment for my clients. During the pandemic, it was very challenging for me, and I grieved in isolation. A lot of us were isolated. Physically isolated from everyone, even from people who were very sick and you wanted to go see them. I came to this field because in my work as a mental health professional in the past, before I became a BCBA, I used to work with adults, and I was so interested about what makes them do the things that they do. Why are they engaging in the same behaviors? And it was a friend of mine that told me about, there's this course that my friend is taking. It's basically looking at why people do the things they do. So I tried to research it. What is that called? And I found that behavior analysis is exactly what I've been wanting to learn my whole life. I've been trying to learn about why I do the things that I do,
Right.
what motivates me to do those things or not to do something.
Yeah.
So I studied behavior analysis, and I decided to pursue it a little bit more, expand my repertoire, and I wanted to be involved in the older adult community. And I started working in my field now, working with older adults, I have learned so much, and I've really, I'm still learning. To be honest, it's a really very humbling opportunity to learn about the aging process.
Right.
So connecting what I know about assisting and supporting individuals with their environment, I am now taking this knowledge and providing the support to other demographics as well, because this is why I love the field that I am in. You're able to apply it with anyone, right? It's
Yeah.
basically about making your environment safe and working for you. You want to make the environment that you're in more accessible and more practical. So my goal is to create a space where there is no judgment and people can reach their goals. Excuse me. Even if their goals is to, wake up and make their beds in the morning, which can seem very hard at times when you're grieving and when you are in a complicated grief that is prolonged.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting area that I want to touch on, the complicated grief. But while we're just diving into grief, why don't you go over the classic, stages of grief for us, and then so we have an understanding of kind of a baseline where we're starting. Someone loses a loved one. That's the big one, right? But there are these kind of secondary, I guess. That's what we're both doing this. Types of grief, and one tends to flow into the other. One grief brings up another grief, but in the event of any kind of loss, we go through stages. You want to touch on the?
Sure. Sure. And I'll start by just talking about grief itself, right? Grief is a process. It is a normal, natural process that everyone experiences. Everybody experiences grief at some point in their life. And when you think about grief, the main thing that comes to mind is sadness, and a lot of people think about grief as guilt, resentment, anger, and detachment and isolation. But grief is a psychological, physical, and behavioral response to a loss. And it's also important, Denise, to point out that a loss can be anything, a loss of a loved one. That's the main loss that we experience in our lives. However, people can grieve the loss of a job, the loss of a pet, loss of a house as well. So when we talk about the different types of grief, we are talking about, have you heard of the anticipatory grief? Like,
Well, if I could see if I understand it, that is someone with a long-term illness that you have time to prepare for the end, like a terminally ill patient, and
yes,
you get to be with them and you go through a process and maybe even hospice, and you have the benefit of processing kind of with them or anticipating the
yes,
end.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. And that's basically the grief that people feel when they know that person or that something is going to end, right? So they're still going through that grieving process. So yeah, that is a type of grief, and a lot of us grieve in that way. A lot of us say like, you know what, I am going to leave my spouse, and you're already grieving that. What is that going to look like to you? Your life without this person, although they didn't pass, right? You're still not going to live with them, and you have to adapt your life to being without them. So that's definitely, thank you for pointing that out. It was a perfect explanation, perfect example, a terminal illness.
Yeah.
Somebody with cancer, and they are given some time to live. Their family members, their inner circle, they're just preparing for that as well.
And then there's the sudden loss, right? Which is a whole other type of process that one unanticipated. Is that the formal term for it?
Unanticipated, yeah, we have complicated grief. And I think that falls under that sudden loss. And that looks like somebody doing something impulsively, right? Lack of a better, for a better example, let's say somebody takes their own life, right? Somebody harms themselves and they commit suicide. So that's a sudden loss for the people around them. Not being able to get closure, not knowing what happened, being in that state of despair and confusion as well, like why. And, people often think about those things. And then we can talk about the stages of grief
Yeah.
because, when something like that happens, people are in denial and in shock. That just didn't happen. Why did that happen? So you're really trying to figure out why. And it's very hard. It's very hard for the person to figure out why the sudden loss, they
Right.
experience something like
Right.
that.
You'll never really know. So, yeah, you want to go through the actual different stages of grief and how, like, as we experience the anger, denial, bargaining, etc., that it's normal to flow from one to the other. There's no order, right? It's not a
Right.
linear process.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Grief is nonlinear. It is universal. That means everybody experiences it. However, it is totally, deeply personal. It's very, very personal for the person experiencing grief. And there are stages of grief, and the main one, the one that most people are familiar with, is the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief, which includes denial. You mentioned a couple of them already. Anger, bargaining. Then you have depression, and then you have acceptance. Although it sounds like it's in sequence, you don't have to follow it as a sequence, and we see it as a framework where people can just find out and pinpoint where they are in the stages of grief. And it's something that you go back and forth. You can start in shock and then you can accept it, right? A lot of people just stay in one particular stage.
Yes. 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 I guess your job as a behavior analyst would be to ascertain, this person may be stuck in anger, or this person may be stuck in the depression part, and maybe that's because they're isolated from their friends and community and because they've withdrawn. So how are we going to help pull them out of this
Right.
stuckness, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And as I mentioned, ABA, or applied behavior analysis, focuses on observable events. It uses the science of behavior to find out, what are the specific variables that are making people isolate or be in anger. For example, somebody that's in the anger stage, they will say or do different things, and in a behavioral perspective or a behavioral lens, you are looking at those specific actions. So our job as ABA practitioners is to identify those triggers, right? And make sure that you set some goals with that person and say, look, this has been happening quite a few times. And when we look at ourselves, our own actions, we don't self-monitor. But it's easier for me to look at you, look at your actions, and say, look, you've done this at least 5 times today. You've cursed 5 times in 1 hour. When in the past you usually don't. What's going on? And we tend to focus on the antecedent, right? An antecedent is a trigger, basically. And then what happens after the antecedent is the behavior itself.
Okay. Would you mind giving another example of something like that, of the antecedent and then the behavior that follows, and how you would observe that, like in a hypothetical?
Of course. So let's take a moment to think about grief, and I would like to align it with COVID,
Perfect.
right?
Yes.
Because I talk about COVID because it did make a big impact in how I grieved, and I learned so much about grieving due to COVID, right? So let's hypothetical think about an older person that lost their spouse, and at the same time, their adult children moved away from home. Followed that by health issues and then a change of routine. As you know, COVID changed a lot of routines for a lot of us. So think about this person just going through all of these changes all at once. It is very hard and it's very overwhelming for somebody to find a way to cope with all of these collective grief and compound losses. And that's another type of grief as well. It's a compound, you know, like when you experience a lot of losses in a very short period of time. So, in a behavioral lens, you look at the person that's withdrawing from their friends, right? And an antecedent to that is losing their spouse, right? Something happened prior to the behavior of isolating. So this person was okay when the spouse died. That's an antecedent. This person is now going to find alternative ways to cope. However, you know, it's hard for somebody to just cope if you've been living with your spouse for so many years. It's hard to think about your life without them. So people will resort to different risky behaviors. You know, sometimes even drinking a little bit more, smoking, engaging in substance use, going out more, even physical changes, staying indoors and hibernating, disassociating from everyone because everyone reminds them, brings them a memory. And it's not a bad thing. The memory is not such a bad thing. However, the bad thing is not learning how to cope with that, you know, with that loss. That's when it gets a little complicated for the person.
And there, it seems to be a reluctance. I want to go back to the COVID and the larger, greater losses in community and society, but there seems to be a reluctance to air any of this stuff, for us to talk about it, although it seems to be a growing field, and there are a lot of resources, which we will get to. Initially, it there's a reticence to speaking to these issues, whether it's because of death or it's just maybe shame or something that is associated with not go. I don't go to work anymore because I'm newly
Right.
retired, or I lost a friend because we had a fight, and I don't want to talk about this because it's shameful. Whatever it might be, we do not have the arena to process it in comfortably,
Right.
although that is changing. But as it pertains to COVID, and this is my feeling, and it's part of why I asked you to join us, is that was such a great shift, like a paradigm shift in life as we know it, for those of us who had not lived through a pandemic of that nature. Now, people who had lived and worked through the AIDS crisis had a little bit of ground to stand on. They're like, oh, we've been through this before. We lost a lot of our community.
Right.
We know what to do. But for those who it was new to, there were losses, like, for example, in Black and Brown communities, the losses were off the charts. They were kind of unprecedented, right? So in addition to immediate family and then friend circle and widening, you have like an entire population that is just being erased
Right.
and not cared for. And so holding the grief of that nature on top of a personal grief, and then I can't even mention everything that's happened since then that we have reason to grieve about,
Yeah.
and including wars and genocides and crises that are not in our immediate environment, and yet it would seem to have an impact on our personal grief
Right.
process. Is this correct?
Totally correct. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, grief is also seen in communities, especially when there's illnesses such as the AIDS crisis and COVID. There's a lot of grief during those times. There was a lot of grief, still a lot of grief and compound grief. And we necessarily didn't have the time to acknowledge it. So I'm happy that you brought that up because it does happen in the Black and brown community. It happens in many communities too. And people often don't talk about these things, right? There's some sort of stigma about being opening up, talking about your feelings about grief. And it is very important to acknowledge those feelings because that's when people tend to just stay in that state. Whereas if they express themselves and say, I am very angry, I'm very angry at this person for doing, and this is how I am expressing my anger. People do a lot of things to express their emotions. One of the great things that's out there, and then we can talk about this later on, is talk therapy. And that's just looks like talking about your emotions. It's not something that you're going to go to a therapist and you're going to talk about your childhood. No, you're just talking about your own emotions, trying to recognize that because we often don't talk about our own emotions,
Right.
So it is very important for people who are grieving to talk about what they're feeling at that moment.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a personal example because now we're going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to try. I had a loss in my family recently, and I have had losses in my family and friends, and, feel like I'm sensitive to loss and people who've had loss. But when it's your own,
Yeah.
right? A friend of mine said the other day, let people help you, And I was like, okay. But for me, I had a breakthrough when I was not angry and I wasn't bargaining and I wasn't thinking about XYZ, where one day I just woke up and I said, I feel bad. And it was somewhere in sad and bad, but I couldn't really distinguish. I just feel bad about what happened. I don't like that this happened. I don't like that, people were left behind and left out of the process. And it's just a very sad situation. Period. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to feel bad. And sorry, but my go to is I don't like to feel bad.
Right.
And I think a lot of people don't like to feel bad. So that's why we don't talk about it. Because if I talk about it, I'll feel bad. But there was some relief in just saying, I feel bad.
Yeah.
Is this what we're talking about?
Yes. Thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
deeply personal experience.
Yeah.
It's also very hard when you're talking about a loved one, so I know that brings memories. And we do try to think about, positive things. However, you're still coping, with the loss and you still might still feel bad. So, yeah, you explained it very well. Talking about and actually tacting those feelings. Here comes the behavioral part. Tacting those feelings and saying, this is how I feel. I feel bad and I feel this is making me feel very, very bad about myself. And the reason people may want to just say stay silent is because that will remind them of how they felt, how bad they felt. So people wouldn't necessarily just talk about it with anyone. That's why it's not easy to just yeah, let me just get help, because they know getting help means talking about those feelings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are just trying to protect themselves as well. And, emotions, grief is a wave of emotions that hits you, and it's very uncontrollable, and people don't want to feel that way. People always want to feel, they want to know that they're happy and they have everything under control, and something like a loss will definitely disrupt people's lives, even if it's temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about your feelings, it is very important to say how you feel at that moment, and especially if you're talking to someone else to help you process those emotions, so they can ask questions. Tell me more. Tell me more. Why do you feel bad? Trying to figure out, to get to the bottom of why you feel bad and get some closure as well, because you're trying to figure out why you feel bad while this person is not here with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? While this opportunity is not here with you. So we're talking in general now, when you're talking, losing someone or something, and you're talking about the feeling of that loss. That's the main point. That's the part that people really struggle with talking about how they feel.
Right.
And they don't find people, they usually don't find someone that can actually listen to them and make them feel heard. That's where the stigma comes in, because people might say, you know what, just get over it, get some help. Well, not everybody benefits from, support groups or therapy. It all depends on that person and how the environment is working for them, right? So you want to figure out what are the things the strategies that you can use to cope in
Mm-hmm.
a proactive way,
Mm-hmm.
supportive systems for yourself,
Right.
basically.
Right. So this is it's kind of beyond just picking up a book or going to a few therapy sessions. This isn't kind of a next level recovery or assistance with these states of grief. If you would, maybe talk a bit about the work that you do with elders who are experiencing some level of, I guess, distress is a good way to put it, either knowingly or unknowingly, like they recognize that I'm isolated because, or I'm lonely, I need to break out of the box, but there's still that resistance. How do you reach folks that are kind of in a state of paralysis behind the grief?
That's a great question, and I was asked that last week during a training that I had about grief and loss. The work that I do, my hope is to create trainings, accessible trainings for staff and for everyday people going through grief and loss, right? So the work that I do is to basically meet the person where they are.
Mm-hmm.
If I am talking to someone and they are expressing a lot of distress, and they're talking about a particular topic or a particular person or something, I do see that and I notice that. So I just try to meet them where they are, and I am very accepting and listening to what they're saying. I don't try to argue with them. My approach is mostly learning about them in that short moment that we're talking, finding out, what is distressing them, like why. It sounds like you have profound thoughts about this particular topic. Do you want to share a little bit more?
Mm-hmm.
If I find that, the person is in a state of complicated grief, it's okay to prompt the person to seek some support. It is very important to also be super respectful because that person may not be ready
Mm-hmm.
yet. However, you want to, I would like to tell the person, it's okay. I do care about how you feel, but I do feel like you can benefit from some support groups. And that's very helpful for people because there they learn about grief itself and how it manifests in people. They can learn a little bit more about how to cope with grief when they feel in that state or in that stage of grief.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is a back and forth process, so it is important to know that there's help out there. However, the person needs to be ready for that help, and just letting people know, like, yeah, I've noticed these things that can help you, but I'm still here. I'm glad that you opened up and you share those things with me. I'm here to assist, even if it's just keeping a moment of silence with
Mm-hmm.
you, respecting their decisions to either seek support or not.
Yeah. It's interesting because you said those words that are very painful for someone who is not, I mean, it's just the wrong thing to say as far as I'm concerned. Get over it, get help, right? Nobody wants to hear that when they're in that situation. Although one day they may be ready to get help, but they're not ready
Yeah.
till they're ready, right? And that brings me to that question. How do we support others who, just as lay people,
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, I see someone who's really suffering behind this. How can I gently just be
Right.
there for them? There's a lot of lip service paid to this idea of like, I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything I can do? My prayers and
Right.
thoughts and all this. But really, what are we doing here for our friend and neighbor and loved
Yeah.
one who is suffering?
Great point. It all depends on the people and the support systems, right? We have to understand that some of the population that I support, the people who are 60 plus, who may feel lonely and isolated. Grief can show up in different ways, especially if they're just giving us a phone call. My phone rings and I'm just talking to this person on the phone, and they may not say that they missed their loved ones or anything. However, you have an idea and you just create that space. If you know that this person has lost someone, right? If you're a caregiver and let's say that your mother lost her husband and she's talking about her husband, right? A lot. You don't want to tell her, you know what, it's so long ago. Like, that happened such a long time ago.
Mm.
The main supportive way to help others when you know this person is going through grief is to basically listen to them and actually talk to them about that. Tell me more. I
Mm-hmm.
want to learn more about, your spouse. What were the great things that you guys did? What is something that you think about all the time? What is an activity that you used to do together that you're now doing and you have adapted? So you always try to lean in towards a positive environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Talking about the different ways that people cope. That's helpful as well. Not saying, yeah, get over it. Of course not. It's not so easy to get over something.
And nor do we want to, I think, in a way, right?
And no, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
You shouldn't get over something because you have made a connection. We are all connected as humans. I am connected to you now that I met you. So we are all connected, especially that person who had that bond
Mm-hmm.
with their loved ones. And the way that we can support them is by being empathetic and putting ourselves in their shoes and thinking, what if this happened to me? How is it that I would like somebody to support me? I want somebody to just be there for me and just pat me on my shoulder. That's something that I can verbally say to someone if I feel, if I'm confident enough to talk to that person. Like if I have a partner, I can tell them, right now is not the best time to talk about this, but maybe in 2 hours I'll be okay, or maybe tomorrow we can talk about this. Not shutting the doors as well. So now I'm putting myself into somebody else's shoes, and acknowledging that people are out there trying to help me, but it doesn't really come out as clear as you want it to be. The best way, and long story short, is just to be there for that person and say, I care about you, and I know that you just suffered a loss, and I am here to talk whenever you are ready.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah. And checking in, I mean, not being overly, but just periodically seeing where
Checking
they're
in, rebuilding, taking small steps.
Yeah.
It's not something that you just get over it. It's not, it's a big thing. Grief is a big thing, and you have to break it down into small different tasks. So you want to make sure that you are okay. First, have a supportive environment, and really just take very small steps to get better.
Yeah.
As long as it takes.
Yeah.
A lot of people take some time to adapt. They don't usually get over it. They just learn to live with the loss. But it looks different for everyone.
Yeah, it just something just came to mind when you're talking about, kind of tenderly reaching out to people and meeting them where they are. And I may not be the best person to demonstrate this right now, having experienced a loss. That said, it's very fresh, right? And a friend and neighbor, just suffered a very traumatic loss. And I want to be there for her. At the same time, I'm in my process.
Right.
And her loss was, I'm not comparing, but it was very traumatic and sudden, different in nature, and it's very fresh. I'm saying this because, in a way, I feel a little paralyzed behind that, and I understand that in the face of my loss, some of my friends and associates may have felt paralyzed. They don't know whether to bring it up or to step back from it. I don't know whether to check on my friend today because I checked on her yesterday, but it's so fresh that you see what I'm saying? We don't have a lot of tools at our fingertips if it's not second nature for us, right?
It's definitely, and nowadays too, we're often so disconnected.
Yes.
It's really important to be in a state where you can support others. You have to tend to yourself. If you want to help someone, you have to first look into yourself to see how you can be a support system for that other person, because it could be complicated to try to help someone when you're also going through some confusion and some loss as well. Grief can show up in many ways, and sometimes you're okay, but sometimes you're not. and one day you're fine, it's a nice, bright, sunny day. Other times you're just in rain, in a mental fog. Grief can also, have you heard of the term brain fog?
Sure.
Because that's basically what grief does to some of us. Like it doesn't make you think clearly. Even the specific tasks that you used to do, daily tasks, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, making your bed, those things become very hard to do for a person going through processing a traumatic loss or a loss nonetheless. So trying to help others also, it is very it's a support mechanism as well. You want to
Yes.
help the person,
Yes.
feel good because you can relate. Like, although it wasn't the same loss, not everybody experiences the same loss, and not everyone processes the loss the same way. You still have that notion that you want to help the person, cope, and you want to support them as well. And we want to also normalize talking about grief.
There you go.
We want to be able to just talk about grief in a way that is destigmatize grief. Even if you think the person is going to curse you out, if you say, hey, you want to talk about what you're going through right now? Even if they say, oh, please, I don't want to talk to you right now. It's okay. You already planted that seed, and that person knows that you're there for them. We don't want to push the person as to the point that, when they see you, they know, like, okay, this person thinks I'm sad all the time. We want to let them know, hey, I'm here for you whenever you're ready to talk about that. Okay, I'm saving a space for you to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And it doesn't have to be about grief. It can be about anything, and that's how
Yes.
you build that rapport with that person.
Yeah. Like companionship is just something, do you want someone to go and do XYZ? I guess we're talking about, connection, community, and building that up and out. And that's kind of where the friendship line may be a baby step, right? For some people to reach out
Yeah.
and connect with others. Can you tell us a little bit about the founding of associated with the Institute on Aging, with which you have a relationship and association? The friendship line was established for people in isolation, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, Institute on Aging is our parent organization, and the Friendship Line was started in 1973. Right. The Friendship Line was designed to provide a space for people to call in and check in with each other. It was designed for people to follow up and to stay connected, despite all of the loneliness that was happening. Even now, loneliness and isolation is just at a high rate, especially for older adults. The Friendship Line was founded in 1973 by Dr. Patrick Arbor. And we became connected to the Institute on Aging in 1995. Dr. Patrick Arbor saw trends in the way that people communicated with he used to volunteer at the San Francisco Suicide Hotline prior to starting the Friendship Line. So he saw the trends in people, how they communicated with that line. They were not necessarily talking about suicide. They were talking about, hey, how are you? How's it going? What's on the agenda for today? So he decided to create the Friendship Line, and that's how we became to be over 50 years of providing community support and an ear to people to call us and to talk about what's on their minds and what's their recipe. It is a very low pressure resource for people who are going through a really hard time. Most of the topics that you can hear on the Friendship Line is grief, loneliness, isolation, depression, anxiety, talking about pets. There's a lot of conversations about being isolated physically and feeling isolated as well. So there's a big distinction on that. So the Friendship Line is meant to be this support system for people or anyone over 18 who is going through a really tough time emotionally or going through some sort of emotional distress. The Friendship Line is here to listen and to cope and to talk about those feelings.
Yeah. And then if someone's in a more emergency situation, that would lead to suicide. Are you connected with the suicide prevention or hotlines, or is that an area where you're working presently, or shall we list some of the resources available
Yeah,
there?
so when we do take in a lot of phone calls from individuals in different states, emotional states, we are trained to, assess for suicide risk. And one of those assessment is done when somebody specifically says that they want to harm themselves. So at that point, we provide some resources. However, we try to assess their immediate environment. Like, I do care about you, and I want to ask you a few questions. Tell me, have you tried to do this in the past, so that we can get a sense of the urgency about this. We're not connected necessarily with any organizations that will send the support, but we can give them the support. For example, we have 988, that suicide crisis line. I don't know if you've heard of that one. We provide that resource to anyone who is in deep emotional distress,
Yeah.
because our services is very casual, and it is non-clinical in a sense, where we don't provide therapy or follow-ups, but we do create a space of belonging and a space of non-judgment for that person talking to us, because we understand that when somebody's in that state, they may not be they may not make right decisions. They can make an impulsive decision, and we try to be there for them and let them know it is a temporary phase. We try to list their protective factors too. What is something that you have? Do you have any pets? Do you have family members? Can I call somebody for you? That's something we can do. Although we are very a low pressure resource, anybody with a phone can call us. We're free. We also are very, very deeply involved in making sure that the person is okay. So we will tell them, is there anyone that we can call for you? I want to reserve this space for you, so that you can talk to us about what's going on. And all while we're communicating with the person who is in distress, we do have supervisors, right? We have people who can actually help you. And if we need to send a medical, not medical, but like an emergency services, we will definitely try to do that. But our focus is to make sure that they are not going to do something at that moment, and provide them with other resources they can follow up in a more formal way, so they can get support, therapy, or some sort of clinical accommodations for themselves, something that we can't provide, but we do let them know that such things are available.
I have heard great things about the Institute on Aging. Dr. Patrick, I know some people who remember him and had really appreciated the establishment of the friendship line, and also the resources available for people who have mental health issues that could lead to suicide, and the investment in preventing that. Circling back to grief, I'm wondering, in your area of helping people deal with loss and complicated griefs, I suppose that loss of a loved one or associate to suicide would be a very specific area of recovery and helping someone navigate that complicated grief. And do you have that type of service available?
So yeah, complicated grief, thank you for bringing that up, because complicated grief requires clinical intervention. Complicated grief is prolonged grief where it disrupts your daily life. You know that someone is in complicated grief because what they used to do before, you see some sort of different, a drastic change in their environments too, a physical environment. So you want to seek clinical intervention for that. We provide virtual grief support groups, and this is a space that we hold for people to talk about their loved ones, to understand grief, and to just be in a really supportive space. That's something that we provide at the Friendship Line. However, if someone is in the state of, prolonged grief, we would like to have them seek some sort of clinical support and clinical intervention, and that can look like a mental health therapist, talking to your doctor about, how can I manage this? And finding out support groups as well. There are a lot of support groups too that people can either go in person or remote. Now after COVID, a lot of things open, a lot of
Sure.
negative things happen, but also paved the way for different ways in which we adapt. And this is one of them too. We offer virtual grief support groups, and that's something that people can take advantage of if they're going through a really hard time.
And those resources are available through the Institute on Aging, as well as you have a personal contact that people can reach you if for counseling or for assessment. Is that correct? Would you like to share that, or how should we get further information
Well,
on this subject?
yeah, on this subject, I am not licensed to provide grief in a clinical format, so I wouldn't do an assessment in that area.
Okay.
However, they can contact us, and I can provide some of the resources and some flyers that we have here. They will go through an intake assessment to see how we can best support them, to see what services they are.
Understood.
Yes. So yeah, it's something that we offer. The Institute on Aging Friendship Line provides virtual support groups, and they would
Yeah.
talk to a professional.
Would you like to quote the number and or website that people can access the information? Because we have come to that part of the hour.
Sure. So they can call the IOA Connect, and their telephone number is 415-750-4111. Find out about services that the Institute on Aging offers, in addition to finding out about how to get involved with the virtual support groups and also the Friendship Line, and the services that we offer. Although the services of the Friendship Line itself as a warm line has a different number. So this number is for people who just want to call and are in distress, and they can call 24 hours. We're open 24 hours. And I'm sorry, let me look for the number.
That's okay. The Friendship Line with the Institute on Aging is available 24/7.
24/7, and they can call 1-888-670-1360.
Repeat that, please.
888-670-1360. 24/7. It's free, low pressure resource. You don't have to provide a name. Or confidential, and it's just, if you want to stay talking, it's fine. If you want to say, what, this is not for me, that's also fine.
Yeah, meeting people where they are. That's a beautiful thing. And thank you, Ingrid Valdez, for spending this hour with us and for the work that you do for
Thank you.
San Franciscans. And
Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk about my field and talk about the work that we do and the organization, that I really love and enjoy providing this type of support to everyone. It was really nice to meet you, and thank you for sharing your experience with me as well.
yeah, well, we have our producer Jenna Littlejohn to thank for connecting us,
Yes, thank you,
and
Jenna.
Eric and Bird and Beckett. We'll be back next month, second Sunday of the month, for more San Francisco Live's live talks. Have a great Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.